Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast. I, of course, am your host, Tylor, who has read these books and loves these books and is very close to saying that things are going to get exciting in this book, but every time I do, Greg tells me that I got him too excited and it spoiled the surprise. So I don't know, sometime in the next 150 pages, things will change. I am, of course, joined by Greg, who I am just putting words in his mouth because I think it's funny. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I do think it's become your kind of catchphrase to be like, I swear to God, this book is about to get really exciting. Like, just hang in there another week, listeners, which I think you're overplaying your need to do so. I'm sure anybody still with us is just in it to win it. So two new, fresh, spanking chapters for us to discuss this week. In case you're worried you started the wrong episode, they would be Chapter 25, Lightning and Rain, and Chapter 26, Connecting Lines, both out of Lord of Chaos.
And both sound like someone trying to remember the name of a song and not getting it quite right.
Yeah, but I mean, two very different chapters, and I will say I think the first one is supposed to feel like a major milestone, but I don't know. I guess I care. We'll see. We'll talk about it. That's the goal of the podcast. But it's certainly still fun to I think I said this just last week, when you get two different POVs. These are in connected timeline or plot lines, but it's always fun to get a little more perspectives in 1 week. So I'm excited to talk about these.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I want to point out, I'm not correcting you at all, but it's very fun to have two characters hundreds of miles apart and refer to them as in the same plot line. It's completely accurate, but it's weird where we are at compared to where this series began. I don't really have too much else to say in terms of big picture story. Why don't we dive straight into Chapter 25, Like Lightning and Rain? Egwene wakes rested, a sentence that I don't think I've said about any character in the entirety of this series. Amos begins to ask her about the Aes Sedai. Apparently there are 6 of them total in the area, and 2 of them are reds, but a gray is in charge. Apparently, Egwene only knows 2 of them, and the wise ones seem to accept her explanation for why she knows so few of them. Nisun, one of the Aes Sedai, is observant and piercing, but sometimes speaks her thoughts aloud, and apparently Ruark reports that she was interested in the library and seemed to mutter to herself about the seals. Egwene wonders why these Aes Sedai are focused on the seals, given that she knows where 6 of the 7 are, 2 of them in Rand's possession, 1 of them in Saladar, and 3 of them broken, and that leaves very little kind of breadcrumbs for these Aes Sedai to be chasing. The wise ones send some individuals to scour the library for any mentions of the seals, trying to get there before the Aes Sedai does. The other Aes Sedai that Egwene knows is Serene, who is a white who apparently has a temper. The wise ones imply that they tried to get information from the dreams of the Aes Sedai but failed to do so, and as a result, Egwene is their only source of information, and they hope that she remembers more. The Aes Sedai Sedai apparently are staying in a noble's manor, likely one of the spies for the Grey Aja, according to Egwene. And Bear reports hundreds of soldiers, both in the city and outside of it, who are apparently supposed to be an honor guard for when Rand returns with them to Tar Valon. Egwene is careful what she says around the Wise Ones because she doesn't want to be caught in the fact that she is not an actual Aes Sedai, but she does suggest they search for traps that are made of the power anytime that the Aes Sedai enter the palace, and they say that they must verify that there are only 6 of the Aes Sedai. She informs the Wise Ones of the dangers of 13 Aes Sedai, something they weren't familiar with, and suggests that there should be guards that are put around these Aes Sedai, but none of them should be Siswayaman. The Wise Ones otherwise discuss all on their own. After breakfast, Egwene walks to the city to check out the palace where the embassy is staying, and outside the palace she can feel a large amount of channeling, and she uses Moraine's spying trick with a pebble, first overhearing a number of maids, and then she does hear someone questioning doing something to prepare for some eventuality, but she's not able to get the details before someone comes out of the palace, seemingly having sensed her channeling, and she runs directly into Gawain. She quickly flees the scene, dragging Gawain along, and they immediately begin holding hands, which I put a question mark next to because it struck me as odd, and then he asks where she has been. He says he commands the honor guard that are with the Aes Sedai, and when Egwene asks him for a favor, he says that he will do anything except for harming Elaine or Andor or becoming Dragonsworn. She insists on more privacy, and so they go to the private room at an inn, and then Egwene asks him how he can serve Elida after everything she's done, and he says he serves the tower, not her personally. Egwene asks why he hates Rand so much, and he says that Rand kills his mother. Egwene isn't able to swear that this is not the case, but she is able to swear that Elaine is fine, which does seem to calm him down somewhat. Gawain says that he used to think that he'd be her warder, and then she says that he will someday, and at this point they begin confessing their love to each other, which seems a little premature, but they're 17. What are you going to do? He agrees not to tell the Aes Sedai that she is there as soon as she asks it, and he begins trying to figure out how to get her back together with the tower, and she carefully avoids saying that she is not going to do that. She then makes him promise not to harm Rand until she can prove that he didn't kill Morgase, and he offers to run away with her, which she seems briefly tempted by, and then she realizes how devoted to her he is, and she promises herself that she will not use that devotion to spy on the Aes Sedai. She eventually tells him about her daily walks, and he says that he will join her most days. She eventually leaves after kissing him for quite some time, and notes that the channeling is still coming from the mansion, and she notes how much time has passed. She wonders what the Aes Sedai are up to. We then switch to 2 POVs that Greg will definitely forget. The first, Katerin telling Colliver that Rand will leave a power vacuum once he leaves, and then Nassoon, who is telling the same to Lord Malon. We then switch to Serene's POV as the Aes Sedai gather. Serene reports that Berelain will be difficult, and Galina reports rumors of a Green Sister in Rand's entourage. They note this could change their plans if there is another Aes Sedai, and they debate if their channeling is a warning to either they debate whether the channeling they felt earlier was either the Green or the Wise Ones. They then conclude that Moraine must be disguising herself as this Green Aja, at least one of them does, and Serene was apparently friends with Moraine and finds this difficult to square with what she knows of her as an individual. Serene then thinks that claiming another Aja is akin to cheating on one's spouse, and thinks that if Moraine is posing as a Green, it will be a significant problem for her. It is apparently Serene's turn at this point, and they say that they are waiting for Rand while also waiting for others to arrive, and one of the Aes Sedai, Arian, says that they are preparing for failure in reference to whatever it is that Serene is about to go do. At this point, Serene goes upstairs and begins channeling large amounts of the power, but she is using it just to do novice exercises. She wonders about Rand, and at this point, she begins to wonder whether it is worth it to do all of this preparation. So this is an interesting chapter. It gives us a lot of new POVs, and as you, I believe, alluded to before, Gawain, 100% a thing now. What did you think of this chapter?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, how many times have you said, "Oh, here's some POVs that Greg definitely won't remember"? Like that seems to be the game in this book is just tacking on one or two, kind of one page or in this case like one paragraph almost POVs in these chapters. So
I think there are
it's crazy.
over 40 POVs in this book, so get ready.
Oof, I am not ready. Yeah, so I guess the framing question I would give is clearly the biggest event here seems to be the confession of love. And, as we played all the way back in the first season where I was kind of oblivious to the Lan Nynaeve romance brewing, it seems like this is not something I'm particularly adept at finding and enjoying. And I would kind of raise the question of, is this one of those moments that feels really good to people who love romance? Or is this also like you were just saying like, oh, like you must be 17 because, I really loved when the new West Side Story movie came out. My wife and I went and saw it, and she was like, I think I don't buy Romeo and Juliet. Like that we're supposed to believe these two teenagers fell in love and that it's a great tragedy that they died the next day. It's like it all feels kind of stupid. And I think there's that kind of valence on this romance. But I imagine some people were excited by this, even if just because it's some romance in a somewhat kind of chaste book.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with romance in The Wheel of Time in particular is that I think that the romances that develop on screen or on the page are really, really, really good, right? I think that the bits that we get of Rand and Elaine at the beginning of the fourth book are excellent, especially if you go back and reread the Avienda and Rand chapters that lead up to them getting together. There is some really incredible work there once you know Avienda's perspective and why she's doing what she's doing. And I think Perrin and Fael has been really effectively executed on the page. At the same time, we have Gawain and Elaine who meet like twice and have a couple of conversations. I'm sorry, Gawain and Egwene who meet a couple of times and have a couple of conversations. And I don't think even we allude to much happening to them off the page. And then suddenly they're in love after she has a dream of him. Or there are a couple of other kind of similar versions of this that we've seen like hints of so far. Maybe they haven't fully developed into full-blown romances, but there's a lot of cases of like meet someone, think they're cute, 4 books later, hey, look, they're a couple immediately. And those romances do nothing for me. And knowing what I do of the fan community, I disagree with them in some cases about Egwene, but Gawain is pretty widely regarded as the worst love interest in the series. I think because he doesn't do anything to earn the love.
Well, and correct me if I have this wrong, he's also got kind of the second son problem, right? Like he's not gonna inherit a throne. He's not going to become powerful. He's just like also around.
Well,
right?
I want to point out the really fascinating thing about Gawain is that compared to his half-brother Galad, he does actually have the title, right? He is the first Prince of the Sword to Elaine because he is her full brother, as opposed to Galad, who is only a half-brother and so isn't eligible for that position. But in every single other way, Galad wins the comparison. He's more handsome, he's a better sword fighter, he's a better general, he just wins every comparison. And so for him to get the girl that Galad was also interested in, I think it's like a lovely idea that Robert Jordan had for this romance, and we just needed like 20 more chapters of them together in the White Tower for me to really buy it.
And I mean, the parts of the show I've watched, we've only seen them a little, but that totally plays into that as well.
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
So if Egwene and Gawain is us going like, okay, I guess they're together now, like I kind of wish I had seen this develop sometime other than in dreams. I'm curious about your thoughts on the first half of this chapter, where we get a little bit of like intrigue with the wise ones in Egwene about who are these Aes Sedai and what can Egwene tell the wise ones without giving away the secret that she is staying away from these Aes Sedai to not be spotted. But at the same time, I'm also most interested here in the second half of kind of this early section of the chapter where Egwene tries to spy on these Aes Sedai and figure out what they're doing. And we get some very vague, tantalizing hints. What are your thoughts about these new Aes Sedai who have arrived on the scene, and both Egwene's and the Wise One's reactions to them?
Well, I would say if it has a vibe for me, it's just that it all feels unsustainable, right? It's like it's too much of a high wire act for Egwene to keep all these secrets in the right directions. So it kind of immediately felt to me like I'm waiting for this to collapse, and who's going to get exposed first, and how is that going to have ramifications, more than I am like I can't wait to see Egwene triumph as she fools everybody and succeeds in this endeavor. So I would say, to me, it also feels like I just have immediately decided that all these Aes Sedai are just pure evil, right? If they're coming from the tower, then they're pure evil, and I'm looking for all the clues about how they're trying to take down Rand.
I love that you say because they're coming from the tower, they're pure evil, when we literally, in the prologue of this book, learned the leader of them is Black Aja. I know you don't remember that, but that's the reason they're evil, Greg.
Yes. Well, and then it's like the other wrinkle on that is that like they have no idea that he's been bonded, right? And like that would be incredibly powerful, one would assume, to whatever their plans are. And so I think so we have the two big factions of the Aes Sedai that we're dealing with. And then within the tower, it does seem that there are a lot of Black Aja, but then there's also the kind of, we're just kind of awful people but are still sticking around, right?
Yeah.
The kind of neutral status quo is good enough for me crowd. And then we also have the is it Alana who bonded him? That's like, I'm not sure which side she's on, but she's been so separate from everybody. It's like she's on her own, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly. I think the last conversation we had between her and Varen was basically we didn't know there were sides until Rand told us. And so they're kind of free agents just by virtue of being away when everything happened. And as you're saying, we don't quite know what these Aes Sedai goal are, but having a link to Rand that they could literally try to scoop up feels really important for whatever they're up to.
And I mean, so all of that just kind of amounts to like, God, this is really messy with the Aes Sedai now. And it feels like before we really head towards the final battle, that needs to be settled, right? This game I'm always playing with, what's the order we got to get through these problems. It feels like either this book or the next book kind of has to clean up the Aes Sedai, so we have just like one main faction, or even two would be okay, that we're dealing with, and then we can move forward to dealing with the Forsaken, and then dealing with the Dark One, and then the Shan-Chan appear somewhere in that. Like, I don't know. I shouldn't always have my eyes on the kind of meta structure of the novels, but this is just, I think, all I'm trying to say is the Aes Sedai factionalism has gone from it's kind of annoying to like, oh, this is actually kind of a huge problem that's like frustrating everybody.
When a book series takes up as much of your bookshelf as this one does, you don't need to apologize for looking forward, knowing there are like 8 more books yet to come. It's a thing we all do at this point in the series. I just wanted to note, as much as we are all, and I think Gawain also notes this, as much as we are all commenting on how Egwene feels very Aiel, it's worth noting how much Egwene feels very Moraine in this chapter, right? She literally uses Moraine's spying trick, but she also is doing such a good job of balancing what she's telling the Aes Sedai, and it feels like she's giving very Aes Sedai answers to Gawain in a few places, not being willing to give kind of a lie or a complete dismissal, but instead a like somewhat half-truth. I thought it was really impressive to see how much she's kind of grown in her Aes Sedai-ness since we've been spending so much time talking about her becoming more and more like a Wise One.
Right, and yet I would say it feels hollow since like it is, her actual abilities are growing, but it's like it's all a lie, right? Like it's, you know, I don't know if I should say this, but it feels like in the world I live in the academic world, you often get people who kind of circulate as part-time instructors for like a really long time, and they are like incredibly good teachers, but you're always just like, oh wait, but why hasn't anybody scooped them up? Like, why haven't? So it feels a little hollow, like, oh, you're great, but also what's off. And that doesn't apply to everybody. And
yeah, some people prefer that.
Adjunct instructors listening, please don't take that personally. But it's like, Egwene, it's like, yeah, she's getting stronger and stronger, but she's held back because she hasn't actually kind of taken the steps necessary to become a full Aes Sedai, and seemingly can't until we really get something established in Saladar, one would assume, unless she gets folded back into the tower, unless all of it implodes and she just walks in and is Amyrlin, which is part of what I was predicting last week, I think.
One of my favorite parts about listening to you in particular analyze this book series is you're so good at understanding what the tropes are that sometimes you're like, here are the 18 possibilities, because I know all the possibilities, and it's really fun just listening to you list them. I love it. I had just like a couple of little moments in here. I think we've hit most of the like big picture things from the Egwene section. Very small thing number one is I think it's important to note that Robert Jordan wants us to know where the seals of the Wise One's prison are, or of the Dark One's prison, I'm sorry. And then also the fact that one of the members of the embassy is interested in the seals feels kind of very interesting. And it's good to see the Wise Ones responding to that, but I'm curious your thoughts on what do you think is going on there, or what do you expect the storyline to be with these seals going forward? Because you're in prediction mode, so I've got to take advantage of it.
I mean, who knows when on earth we're recording, but not the biggest movie in the country right now, but the second biggest movie in the country right now is Mission Impossible. Darn you, Lilo and Stitch, for giving us trouble. And the beauty of that franchise is just the giant ticking bomb, right? Like they've built 8 movies around that idea of like, we just need a bomb ticking away and everybody gets excited. I mean, that's the last act of Star Wars too, right? Like it's effective. And that's what the seals are to me. It's ticking away, right? And the newest Mission Impossible uses DEFCON in the way DEFCON is supposed to be used, right?
Okay.
And it's like, yep, as it ticks up, and that to me is, the seals are that level. They're the DEFCON level bomb ticking away. And it's like we're going, as was said, we have 6 of the 7 located, and I'm making sure I got this right. 3 are broken. So
correct.
So we have a countdown of 4 left on the clock, and one of those is still missing and could be broken somewhere, although I feel pretty safe in assuming it's not. That will be the one that we have to all scramble to get to, and will probably break as somebody climactically reaches for it or something like that.
Well, and it's worth noting, the last time that we were in Rand's head, he was asking a philosopher, is there any reason that you would want to break the seals of the Dark One's prison? And the answer he was given was no, only a madman would do that, but Luce Theron was excited about it anyways. So if we're keeping track of this countdown, like, it's important to note lots of people are paying attention to it, and Rand in particular is focused on the same thing that these Aes Sedai are. And so if we're talking about them meeting soon, I think that's important to keep an eye on.
Well, and I just want to say, Luce Theron in that moment is now my children have picked up this habit, which is a very common children habit. So, like, I was in the car with my daughter this morning. We drove by the ice cream shop in town, and she's like, oh, we should stop and get ice cream. And I'm like, it is 9:30 in the morning. If I stopped and got ice cream, your mom would kill me. And from the back seat, all I hear for the next half mile is, do it, do it, do it. I was like, oh,
so that's me playing Dungeons and Dragons.
It's Luce Theron all in my head just saying, go get ice cream and break the seal. See if you're still married.
There is on Reddit, in one of the Wheel of Time like subreddits, there is a bot that if you mention Luce Theron will shout at you about Ilyena, and that's all I can think of in this moment. Is you literally in the back of your car have like a bot that responds the way. That's perfect. So I do then want to note, Katerin, one of the Aes Sedai, is telling Kolaver that Rand will leave a power vacuum, and Nessun is telling Melan that Rand will leave a power vacuum, and it seems that Serene reported to Barrelane that Rand would leave a power vacuum, and those are 2 people who were about to go to a civil war if Rand hadn't potentially intervened along with the Shido, and the person who is ruling the city for Rand. So these Aes Sedai seem very confident that Rand will be leaving with them, and they seem to already be planning about how they're going to manipulate the politics after that happens.
Interesting, and I do think the conflation of the Aes Sedai court intrigue with this kind of more traditional court intrigue just feels like a powder keg.
Yeah, now we're getting there. I'll bet we're gonna get that roller coaster going downhill real soon, Greg. In terms of the discussion between the Aes Sedai, the last section of this chapter, I want your thoughts on something that we have seen. Now, I'm going to say it seems to be a Red Aja characteristic. Elida has done this, Liandrin has done this, and now Galina is doing it. They get an idea about what the solution to a puzzle is, and once they think they know it, they know it. It must be true. The example in this case is Galina saying, well, someone was spying using a trick Moraine used to know, and they're reporting a Green Aja in the area. It must be Moraine pretending to be a Green Aja. And this reminds me a lot of like Elida insisting, well, I understand how people are going to respond to my proclamations, so just do it. And I think that reaction is really interesting as a reader, because it's really fun to have characters that are otherwise smart arriving at really dumb conclusions. And it creates like a really delicious kind of dramatic irony paired with you hate the person who is wrong.
Yeah, well, and my main reaction was like, I'm glad you just said it was a dumb idea, because that was it's like, what? Like, no, like, yeah. and certainly, like you said, there's no chance that I was fooled into thinking like, oh, well, maybe. It's like, it's so dumb and obvious that it just feels like, I mean, I guess it's Law and Order when you're sure they have the wrong guy in the first 10 minutes, right? And you're like, all right, just play this out and let's get to the real stuff.
You mean every episode of Law and Order? Yeah, I understand how that show works too. I do want to just note at the end of this chapter, all of the Aes Sedai are discussing, are we preparing for failure? Are we doing things that won't be necessary if things go the way they want? And then Serene goes to prepare for failure, whatever that means, and it seems to mean channeling a lot of the power doing nothing. Any thoughts on what this is setting up, or is this an enigma that will be revealed sometime in this book or the next?
I'm sure it will be revealed next week. There's a prediction, because I don't really know what they are up to, but I assume it is all about, I assume not gentling him because they don't have the right number, right? You need 13.
So it is worth noting they don't have the right number, but in this section, they do note a few female names that are arriving to the city. So it seems they will at least have more than 6, even if we can't add up to 13 quite yet.
It seems like a big jump. So I'm going to assume it's not quite there, but maybe trying to diminish him in some way to prepare for everyone to control him. But I assume the tower just wants to take him off the board, even though as a reader, I'm like, well, that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
Although I might have said it was impossible to bond him not that long ago.
Absolutely fair. Speaking of the bond, it is one of the many, Chapter 26, connecting lines. Rand watches a storm roll in as he watches the Saldean horse soldiers and feels through the bond that Alana has recently hurt her ankle. The Saldeans do what seem to me to be really crazy tricks for soldiers, and Rand notes that there is Aiel tension between him and his guards because he has only allowed them to bring 20 guards, and they seem suspicious of all of the Saldeans, thus 20 is not nearly enough. Rand apparently hasn't seen Sulin, normally the head of his guard, since they went to Shadar Logoth, which was 8 days ago. Rand uses the power briefly to see 2 rocks that were placed near Bashir days earlier, and he thinks that this is actually more important than many of the other things going on around him. Dira Bashir, Davram's wife, then approaches and asks Rand whether he finds Davram amusing, and Rand says thank to thank her husband, and then immediately rides off, thinking that things are always uncomfortable between him and Dira. Lews Therin seemingly comments on the situation, particularly the futility of dealing with women, according to him, and then immediately goes silent when Rand questions him, causing Rand to worry all the way home about his sanity and about Lews Therin. Rand is frustrated as he rides through the city, as there are many cheers that are referring to him as the king, and as he tries to avoid looking at the crowd, he instead looks up and sees a white cloak pull out a crossbow, and he is able to block the bolt in the air using the one power, and kills the shooter using fire, but apparently another crossbowman has also fired at him, and he is pulled to the ground by a maiden who apparently has been killed by a second bolt fired in his direction. After the crowd clears, 3 other Aiel are down, as well as a few other individuals who are not soldiers, and the maidens bring a captive, as well as a few others, a second shooter, and some lookouts, and Rand orders that 2 of them be hanged, while saying that the third will be sent to report to Padron Niall that he will also hang for what happened today. Rand then memorizes the face of Desora, the maiden who died for him, and when he sees a dead woman in the streets, he tells someone to offer her family gold, but also find out her name, clearly for his list of women who have died for him. Rand returns to the stables in the palace and is greeted by a petition for a meeting with the Sea Folk, and he says that he will meet with them later in the day, but they are apparently not staying in the palace, so there may be some delay. At this point, he learns that the Lady Elenia wishes to meet with him, and Reen Harfor, as he is making his way in that direction, asks Rand about Elaine and whether he is going to give her the throne, and when he confirms this, she doesn't respond in any notable way. At this point, his Aiel guards warn him not to let his guard down, even after an assassination attempt, but he once again limits them to only having 2 guards in the palace. At this point, he arrives in his room, and Elenia is there and seems thrilled when he asks about Andoran history. He first asks about Suran, one of the first kings, and also his queen, and then he asks about at the time immediately after Arthur Hawkwing fell, and she notes that there were dozens of nobles vying for Hawkwing's throne, but eventually it was secured by the first queen, and then nowadays all of the noble houses are kind of considered to be important because of how many links in their lineage they have to that original queen. At this point, he asks about the relationships between the noble houses, and specifically the relationship between Tigraine and Morgase. He is told that they are cousins, and Rand seems kind of gross about this because, incest. But then he asks about whether there is any blood relation between the two, and is told that if they were farmers, they would be considered to be unrelated. He is relieved by this, and then briefly almost spaces out on the conversation, and is eventually told that he looks like Tigraine, and he eventually dismisses Elenia, apparently after making a face when being told he resembles his mother that seemingly scared her to the bone. He thinks a lot about sanity and about Elaine as the day passes by, and he wishes Lews Therin would speak so he would feel less crazy by comparison, before eventually declaring his intention to go to Cairhien and asking that no one tell Avienda that he is leaving. So, Connecting Lines is a weird name for this chapter, but I kind of like it because of all the weird references to both lineage and Alana. What was your take on Rand finally looking at these Seldian soldiers, and they got acrobatics for him?
Well, I will say, so as listeners have pieced together, or maybe I've said, I go to see a lot of movies, and one of the trailers that's getting played way too much right now is for the new sequel coming out to Freaky Friday, and there's a moment where I think it's Jamie Lee Curtis is getting her palm read, and the psychic, who's Vanessa Bayer of SNL fame, says, like, oh, your 2 lifelines crossed once in the past. And Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis, like, look at each other and are like, whoa, like, we know what that was. That was Freaky Friday. It is so stupid. And yet, as soon as I saw this, I was like, that was immediately what came to mind. Just a stupid joke of, that is not an endorsement of that movie. It looks like trash. I did think it was notable that the kind of point here seems to be that Rand finally goes and sees these soldiers, and are we supposed to just assume it was always going to be a trap, or the trap was just attack of opportunity? Like, how exactly are we supposed to read that?
Yeah, so this is what's interesting here, is we get a lot of kind of suggestions about how Rand and Bashir are doing something, but we still don't know what that something is, right? So Bashir clearly placed some specific rocks in particular places and then got his soldiers to practice where Rand was observing them near where those rocks were. And I think your intuition is a very reasonable one. Maybe those rocks are in some way designating a trap or where people could fire or something. And so if Samael were to attack this gathering, it would be a perfect trap for this Forsaken that they've been trying to bring down for more or less the entire book. We had previously presumed that maybe these practices were a distraction for something. Maybe those rocks denote something that's being transported or carried through the area, and this is what's keeping eyes off of it. We don't know what it is, but we now have enough hints that we can start playing the what in the world are Bashir and Rand up to game when eventually, hopefully, someday, we figure out what is going on with this.
Helpful. And so I don't think there's really a moment that this responds to, so we'll call this another general thought. The other thing I have been noting, and it comes up here as it did in your summary, is that, like, it seems like without a question, Rand's like, yeah, of course I'm giving the throne to Elaine. And he's had that moment like 4 times. And I will say, primarily as a reader, I'm like, yeah, he doesn't want this stupid throne. He's just going to give it to Elaine. Yeah. But I think we've finally hit the 99th clue in repeating that so often that I'm starting to think, oh, geez, I don't think he's going to give the throne to Elaine, right?
Right.
Where I'm sure I should have picked that up like 10 ago. And again, I think his intention is still to do so, but it won't happen, right? It's the guy saying he's going to retire at the end of this month that you know is not going to live to the end of this month.
I appreciate that, mostly because I literally just watched the episode of How I Met Your Mother when they note that a character in the Lethal Weapon franchise says, I'm too old for this in every movie, and then doesn't retire after that movie. And I think that that's exactly what you're describing, right? I want to note here, I am not enthusiastic for Perrin whenever he starts to reappear on the scene, because Rand, the Dragon Reborn, is clearly afraid of his mother-in-law. Dira Bashir is only on the page for like 2 paragraphs, and Rand gets out of that conversation as fast as he possibly can. I don't have anything else to say about her. Any thoughts on the horse acrobatics or Dira Bashir before we arrive back in Camelin?
I just want to keep learning more. Like you said, you made it clear, which is always nice when I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't miss something. I'm supposed to not know it. So now totally. I just want to know it.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't remember the answer to the rocks on the ground. I'm curious to find out too. Let's then talk about White Cloak Assassins. This is, I think, a well-executed action sequence. I think it's a good example of Robert Jordan kind of using Ta'Viren to his advantage, letting Rand survive the encounter because of a chance look up into the roofs. And it's done quickly, which is something that we've said over and over again. Thank you, Robert Jordan, for not writing excessively long action sequences. I think the big takeaway here is that Rand's kind of complex about women dying for him is reaching more serious proportions than I think I had anticipated prior to this chapter, right? His dedication to memorizing the face and name of everyone who falls at his side seems less healthy to me than where he was at with this a book ago. Were there any other takeaways you had, or what were your thoughts on this scene overall?
I think this is probably more a writing thing than a kind of clue, but the way he referred to it as like memorizing her face, it felt like, you know, you were scanning somebody into the Matrix or something. Like, sure. I don't know. I didn't quite like that phrasing. I agree with you that adds to that kind of edge of menace that is within that. But, you know, I think that just speaks to, I wanted to view it as honorable or, you know, important. And I was like, this feels a little off.
Yeah, I think the one other kind of similar thing to that I had is in a couple of books ago when there had been violence maybe at the docks in Tyr or a couple of other times when kind of civilians had gotten involved, Rand very frequently was like, what can we do to help? Can we give some gold to them? Let's make sure that the commoners are taken care of, kind of thing. Here, the only one who he offers to do that for is the woman whose name he needs to know for his list. And I think that his reaction has gone from, let's make sure everyone is okay, to like, only the women who have fallen for me are the people who I'm really paying attention to the loss. And that feels very, very different from my perspective. Similarly...
But that's because you hate women. Oh, sorry. We're not supposed to say that on air. Oops, sorry.
Very funny. And true. Obviously joking. I do want to note here, if we're talking about Rand being kind of a different place than where he has been, hanging Manjin felt like a big deal for him 2 chapters ago.
He 8 days ago or whatever.
Yeah.
It just revealed as well. Yeah.
He just offhand here is like, okay, kill those 2. That guy gets to live, but only so we can say that his boss is also going to get killed. And that's a quick change. I realize that executing White Cloaks is not the same as executing a follower of yours, but Rand is getting a lot more comfortable with execution than he was very recently.
I mean, you break the seal on your first execution, and then it's just they all come flying. You hit 100 before you even know it.
This is something Greg knows from experience, in case you are wondering. I then basically note Rand says, I am going to meet the sea folk this afternoon, and then jumping to the end of the chapter, leaves town less than an hour later. And otherwise, we get a conversation about Andorran history and genealogy. What did you think?
I mean, the genealogy was mainly just to confirm what you pieced together for us, God, like 3 shows ago now? 4 shows ago?
Mostly just to confirm that Rand and Elaine is not Luke and Leia Skywalker.
Okay, and so that we can still root for them, and it's acceptable. I mean, based on where I grew up, the way they said, like, if you were farmers, it wouldn't matter. I was like, yep, checks out, got it. Like, I know exactly what that means.
Also,
with all love to where I'm from, should anybody I went to high school with be listening with their sister/wife.
I was going to say cousin wife, yeah. I think that this is a good scene for me in that you can feel Rand's discomfort at asking the question, and I like kind of him figuring out how to frame it where he's getting the information he wants without letting Elenia know why he's asking and not kind of tipping his hand the way he almost did with Dylan in the previous chapter. And I also think it's worth noting he's not asking Dylan. And so he's clearly very conscious of not letting any of these nobles kind of know the full story. And so that kind of Rand character piece is what worked for me here, even as I will be the first to admit I don't really care all that much about whether or not Rand and Elaine are 2nd or 3rd or 80th cousins.
And I think it's the Game of Thrones inflection that makes me like not care that much about it, which is weird because like I'm not endorsing incest, but like it's like, oh well, you know, they normalize that family lines are really, you know, siblings and such. So I'm like, yeah, some kind of cousins. Again, maybe it's where I grew up. It's like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine for farmers.
I do really appreciate that in a lot of cases, Robert Jordan looked at the tropes of like medieval style fantasy and said, let me try to modernize this a bit and like kind of do something that's not quite that, right? Let's have the royal families be closely related, but not enough for it to be actual incest. And then like 5 years later, George R.R. Martin was like, hold my beer. We're going the opposite direction.
Well, and I gave up on the subsequent Game of Thrones series after like 2. It just wasn't for me. But I think it's even leaned more into that at times.
That is accurate, yeah.
Yeah.
So other than the very funny moment of how would these people be related if they were farmers, which is just a lovely way to ask that question, I don't really have too much else until we get to the end of this chapter where Rand wishes Luz Theron would speak so he would feel less crazy. And A, I've been there. And B, I'm a little worried about Rand, guys.
Well, I would just earmark in the piece before that, just like it felt notable that they're still talking to us about Arthur Hawkwing, and that we need to keep our eye thinking about that piece of the puzzle still, as I alluded to last chapter. But yeah, I mean, it feels like that last gesture was just meant to tell you like he's descending further. So when the voices in your head stop, but you still feel crazy, that seems very bad.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it. Is Rand has in the past been kind of freaking out a lot of people by spacing out talking to Luz Theron. This is the first time that he's caused someone to clearly panic just as him. And not a great look. Next week, we have 2 chapters summed up in 2 one-word titles. That is 27 Gifts, 28 Letters. And we are past the halfway point, and I don't know whether I would call it downhill, but I do feel like we're starting to build up some, little bits of plot advancement starting to add up to big things at this point. I don't know whether we have seen any one chapter that makes me go, yes, we're moving, but I feel like we are a lot further from where we started right now than we would have been at a similar point in a lot of other books. Does that feel accurate to you?
Yeah, I just want to note for listeners that next week's 2 chapters are pretty long, so give yourself a little extra time. But I would agree, the metaphor I was thinking about is it still feels like we're setting up dominoes, but, I'm thinking of, some master domino display where, you're all but there, and you're just kind of lining up maybe the trigger line and then get to knock that over and start to let everything fall. But I agree that it does feel like we have a big array of factors ready to topple, and I'm excited to see where they go. I think more than anything, it's emblematic of that I was in kind of predicting mode for a large chunk of tonight's show. That means I want to see where these things are going. Again, we don't allude to it all the time, but we fell behind on recording and have been kind of working at a really strong clip for a couple weeks. So to me, that also adds to that sense of momentum, and I try not to let that shape my reactions too much, but it just naturally does. So it does feel like the combination of factors feels like this is going to start to cook, and I can't wait. Will it be next week? Will it be the week after? Will it be 17 weeks from now? I think that would put us in the next book. We will find out sometime through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.